There are several ways to conceptualize structural change. We all know that structural change is something important. A particularly interesting and recent one is what Branko Milanovic calls a non-Marxist world. Branko Milanovic is a great economist working at the World Bank and a great specialist on inequality. He wrote a book, The Haves and Have-Nots, A Brief and Idiosyncratic History of Global Inequality. And he proposed the following. There you have the Gini index. Everybody knows what the Gini index is? Yeah. Okay. And what you look, 1870, 2000. Okay? And he said, in 1870, the most important part of global inequality was explained by class. Look at the change. And location. He said, Marx observed that poor people all over the world share the condition of being poor, regardless of the country. So, poor of the world unite. But now, it seems that things are different. And location explains much more global inequality than class. And this is really a very important change. But besides the imbalance between class and location, there is another very interesting issue in this picture. That is in 2000, global inequality was higher than 130 years before. Three quick comments on that. First, globalization has not brought yet a better world for all, and the discerning trends do not indicate that this will be the case. The evidence of the prevailing inter-country income inequality gives reason 60 years after to the Latin American structural school. Such school defined underdevelopment not as a not yet developed situation waiting for catch-up, but as a situation ingrained in the economic and political world order that would need such order to change to have an opportunity to advance towards development. So this is just to set a common point of departure, okay? Rooted on facts, not on ideology. Everything good with ideology, but facts can be useful. From 1870 to 2000, global inequality between countries measured by the Gini index increased. The 20th century was a period of amazing knowledge accumulation. Nobody can deny it. Amazing knowledge accumulation, technology accumulation, innovation accumulation. Let me just share a small piece of literature with you. David Landes. Anybody knows who David Landes is? Unbound Prometheus, the history of industrial revolution. Great, great, great book. He said, in 1830, the British lived more near to the Roman legionaries than from their own grandchildren, giving account of the change during the 19th century. You can imagine during the 20th century. Okay? So this is deeply true. It is fair to say that in some part of the world, a different structural change took place during that period. The transition to a knowledge-based and innovation-driven economy. Would you say that this is true? In some part of the world, I am not saying that everywhere, okay? Would you say that it is true that in some part of the world, a different structural change took place, that is a transition to a knowledge-based and innovation-driven economy? The expression is from the Lamotte Paquet to Canadian Economist, 1996. We underline it is taking place in some regions of the world and not in others. Nevertheless, the whole planet is deeply conditioned by some transition in which a capitalist knowledge society emerged or is already being consolidated. It's like everything else. Industrialization first was only in England. Then it crossed the Northern Sea, it comes to Germany. After it crossed the Atlantic, it comes to the United States. We, Latin Americans, were not industrialized, but we suffered industrialization like African and Asian. So it doesn't, okay? When this is exactly what we mean by structural change. Something so important that even if some have it and some have not, the whole planet is involved in the impact of the change. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Milanovic findings are in tune with the following statement. I already put it yesterday. Knowledge-based inequality prevails in the contemporary world. This appreciation belongs to a book, Identities, Boundaries, and Social Ties, sociologist Charles Steele. In the contemporary world, to be on the side of the have or on the side of the have-nots in terms of income is related to knowledge. Would you accept that? Do you agree with that? Have and have-not in terms of income is related to knowledge. This, in the first place, means to have or not to have access to advanced education. I know that we are all talking about different kind of knowledge acquisition. But perhaps I am biased. I am a university teacher. I work at a university. But let me tell you that if the treasures of Western modern knowledge is important, going into advanced education is important. One thing is to say that millions of people do not have access, but we shouldn't make, I don't know if it's said like this in English, hacer de necesidad virtud. Make from necessity virtue. One thing is that is reality. Other thing is to say that reality is okay. It's not okay. At least this is what I think. You are allowed to disagree. In general terms, the situation of the South has improved in terms of access to higher education. But the gap is there, and it is a wide gap. Gross enrollment ratio, but geographical region. 2000, 2007. You see, we the Latin Americans, look how it grows. It has been a huge advancement, but look at the differences, okay? So this is the world where we live in terms of access to higher education, access to formal knowledge that allows to do many, many things. We just listened to a talk about ICT in India. You cannot do ICT without science. You cannot do pharmaceuticals without science. You cannot fabricate vaccines without science. So this is important. It's not all the story. I am not saying that's all the story. What I'm saying is that this is important, very important. But perhaps the most important knowledge gap relates to the degree in which local knowledge capacities are mobilized. We have listened to it since I've been here yesterday, today. Mobilizing capacities is even more important than having capacity. I prefer to have less and use it 100% than having 1,000 and use it 50. Okay? Successful cases of economic development prove the importance of simultaneously providing not only a flow of better educated people, but also jobs where their skills are demanded. Nations that only address the supply side of educated people end up educated for migration. This is common sense, but it has been said by the great, great economic historian, Rainer. Educate Rainer, so I can quote it. And look at the title of the book. How rich countries got rich and why poor countries stay. Okay? When GlobalX, the Global Network for Economics of Learning, Innovation, and Competence Building Systems, this Lundvall is a genius to make the process, was launched. Look at what they say in the manifesto of launching LOMLEX. In national education system, people learn specific ways to learn. In labor markets, they experience nation-specific incentive systems and norms that will have an impact on how and what they learn. Two things: learning and using what you have learned in the labor market or whatever activities you are to go there. Another way of characterizing the knowledge-based structural change is that some societies are advancing toward learning societies. And why learning is preferred? Well, Bjorn Johnson, Lundvall, and all the Oliver School have long ago, the Lundvall and Johnson paper on learning is from 1994. A very, very, very influential paper, quoted and quoted and quoted. Why learning is so important? Think about it. Is knowledge accumulation? Is information? No, it's learning. Because, why learning? Because everything's been changing all the time. The only way to cope with change is learning. This is why learning is so important. Learning, however, means walking in two legs. Or, as a British scholar likes to say, cutting with a scissor with two blades. And he said, try to cut a piece of paper with a scissor with only one blade. What happens? You cannot cut. Okay. So, if you don't walk in two legs, we are going to see which are these legs, you cannot learn. First, you have to enhance capabilities. This is learning by studying. You have to go to school, to high school, to university, what you are doing. Okay, that's no problem. Empirical proxy. How can you simply try to approximate the stage of a country in terms of learning by studying or to enhance capability? We can agree easily that enrollment in higher education is important. This is much more tricky, to open opportunities to mobilize capabilities and creativity for problem solving or innovation. Okay? Do you agree? This is the second leg? Okay, what a proxy? What a proxy for that, for opportunities? Tricky, no? There are very good ones, but few countries measure the goodness. So I propose to take one that is bad, but we can have it for all countries. And it is the proportion of the GDP, the richness of a country devoted to R&D. No good. I'm not going to argue. You are absolutely entitled to say that this is not a good proxy. I agree. But it is not so bad, and it is available for all countries. So, learning by solving, I call it learning by solving. What people do is to use their knowledge, information, and creativity to solve problems in real world. Empirical proxy. Okay, what do you have when you have 2 points in a map? You have 2 coordinates in a map. You can fix a point, okay? So if we take these 2 proxies for each country, we are going to be able to put each country in a map, okay? You can do it. The information is very easy. You can take the UNESCO for enrollment in higher education and whatever you want to R&D over GDP. Okay? Horizontal axis, enrollment in higher education. Vertical axis, R&D over GDP. Do you want to see what it goes? How it goes? With this. I put South Korea because South Korea was there in 1975. And it is there 2007. Okay? It is the only country that make this kind of journey. But I was tempted the first time I made this map, many years ago, to propose that this is a learning divide. Okay? What separates countries is a huge learning divide that is not made only but not having people in higher education, but even more for not having opportunity for that people to be creative and keep on learning. And you know why I think that this part is much more complicated than this one? Because this one is relatively autonomous. You can say, the university system can say, okay, I want 30% more students. If I am not mistaken, in Brazil now, Dilma Rousseff, the president, is trying to open up the university system so much more people can go in. I am not going to discuss the politics if it is good or if it is wrong. But the fact is that a president of the republic can say, I want 30% more students. Cuba has done this through the municipalization of universities. But you cannot say, I want my firms to be more innovative. I want my firms to give more opportunity to be creative to the people. This is something that is not in the power of politicians. This is deeply rooted in the productive structure. Okay? So it's much more difficult to change the vertical axis than the horizontal. And of course, we don't know what happened with China. China is changing every week. China is flying. And I think China is going to cross the learning divide because they are not only basing what they are doing in cheap labor. They have by now more PhD, not only per capita, in absolute terms, than huge countries of the Western pedigree. So we are witnessing there something that we don't know where it's going to be. Okay? However, the knowledge-based inequality that prevails in contemporary world means more than an equal income distribution. You remember the first slide? Okay? We said that we have a structural change because the nature of inequality measured by income distribution, but this is not the only way of conceptualizing knowledge-based inequality. And we come again to Amartya Sen. If our paramount interest is in the lives that people can lead, the freedom they have to lead minimally decent lives, then it cannot but be a mistake to concentrate exclusively only one or other of the means of such freedom. We must look at impoverished lives and not just at depleted ones. That means that the Gini index is important, but it is not all. And the problem is that impoverished lives is a quantitative concept. And this is why it's so rich, and this is why it's so difficult to deal with. But, so the question is, what can possibly mean knowledge-based inequality from the perspective of having the freedom to live minimally decent life? The question is difficult, but the only question that are worth answer are difficult. So, let's take some facts and trends that build an answer. IPR agreement that hamper access to vital medicines. Talking about IPR, have you ever heard the concept of the second enclosure? The first enclosure was in Britain, when they circled the agrarian villages and they expelled people to go to the manufacture. The second enclosure is the way of circling knowledge production, putting a price on it, putting IPR and owning them privately. And you know that this is very, very, very complicated. We have here people from India, people from Brazil. We know how they have fought against that, but it continues to be one of the main sources of inequality. Knowledge-based inequality. the use of sophisticated genetical information to refuse assurance or jobs. Now that it is said that in 24 hours, in a few couple of years, you will be able to decode the whole genome of a person, you can imagine the power this can imply if you want a job, if you want an assurance, if you want whatever, you, your children. We are living in a scary world. Research and innovation agendas oriented almost exclusively towards commercial demand. Who in this room knows the expression, the 90-10 gap? So it was explaining. Why don't you explain, please?
At least in the pharmaceutical industry, is that 10% of the opposite. 90% of the research and development are addressed to diseases that affect 10% of the people in the world.
In the medical general, it is an expression coined by the World Health Organization. And it is even a little bit more general than pharmaceuticals. It said that all 90% of the world research on health issues, 90% is devoted to the illnesses of the 10% of the population. The real issue is the other way around. 10% of all the world effort in health research is devoted to the illnesses of the 90% of the population. Research and innovation agendas oriented almost exclusively towards commercial demand. Innovation that harm in different ways the living environment of poor population, pushing further social marginalization. Who are the victims of climate change? The first ones. Who? Okay, it's all. National innovation systems that do not take on board the problem of the poor population. And they are happy because competitiveness is up and exports are up and everything is up, but poor people continue to be poor. And given that inequality is the problem, not only depleted wallets, we have that this is really complicated. So let me just in case you have forgotten, what can possibly mean knowledge-based inequality from the perspective of having the freedom to live minimally decent lives. And then these are part of what means. It's okay so far? It is fair to posit that knowledge policies that lead to these facts and trends are non-democratic policies. Democratic knowledge policies are those that provide for the well-being of the majority. Democratic knowledge policies are those that provide for the diffusion of useful innovation to the majority. Non-democratic knowledge policies are those that in active or passive ways exclude important segments of the population from the benefits of knowledge production and innovation. We need to challenge non-democratic knowledge policies. We need to build democratic knowledge policies. Would you agree with that? I am not trying to be demagogic. I am not trying to be simplistic. I try to frame some big issues in a way that we perhaps are able to tackle, okay? How can we advance towards that aim? Well, let's try a methodological proposal. 4 approaches. The normative approach, the theoretical and descriptive approach, the prospective approach, and the propositional approach. We usually mix everything up. We are synthetic. But sometimes it's important to come back to analysis and to be analytical, because they are different. It's okay? It's clear that they are different. Okay, what do they mean? Anyone wants to interrupt? Speak now. Okay. The approaches and their relationship. This is going to be complicated. Let's go step by step. Normative. has to do with values, with what is considered good or wrong. Theoretical and descriptive has to do with theories and with facts. Prospective, it's not exactly foresight, it's a little bit different. Has to do with trends, but as Louis Montfort said, techniques and civilization, trend is not destiny. And this is why we're here talking about what we are talking about. Propositional has to do with proposal for action, and it is policy oriented. Okay? Relationship between. The normative indicate the theoretical and descriptive, what to look at, and it defines the course. For the propositional and for the prospective. Seneca used to say, there is no wind for those that don't know where they are heading for. This is the role of the normative approach. Theoretical and descriptive. What is possible? Because I want everybody to live forever. This is a very nice normative approach. Okay? We are not naive. We need to know that some things are not possible. Okay? And fits with information, perspective, and propositional approaches. And the prospective goes to the propositional, looking into present from the future. If you want to go there, put yourself there and look what you need to do now to go there. It's trivial, but nevertheless. Okay? Now, let's go into each of them. The normative approach. First, the Amartya Sen approach to development as freedom and to see people as agents and not as patients. This is key. There is another one that perhaps you don't know. I am going to quote a Nobel Prize in Economics. Elinor Ostrom's expression of respect towards the knowledge that anyone possesses. Instead of presuming that some individuals are incompetent, evil or irrational, and others are omniscient, I presume that individuals have very similar limited capabilities to reason and figure out the structure of complex environments. In Spanish, and in my own country's way of saying, I would say, naides es más que naides, something that only perhaps Cecilia is going to understand. It's very Uruguayan. That means exactly that. Okay? You don't have the right to think of anybody that knows so much less than you listen. And this is part of a normative approach. And democratizing knowledge as a main goal to achieve development. Okay? This is the normative. It's very normative. No, it is not. What is the idea? Why theoretical and descriptive approach in the same? And I'm going to quote again Einstein, but in a different frame. In 1924, Einstein was discussing with Heisenberg about the nature of reality. And he said, it is the theory which decides what we can observe. And this is true in physics, and it's true in social sciences as well. And so we have to decide which theory are we going to use to be able to observe and go to the descriptive part of the story. Okay? But let me just quote against method. This is really deep. Not only the description of every single fact dependent on some theory, but there also exist facts which cannot be unearthed except with alternative to the theory to be tested, and which become unavailable as soon as such alternatives are excluded. I think that you were asking about the theory of the North that perhaps were not applicable in the South. Someone, who was? Who was?
Not exactly that was not applicable, but not straightforwardly applicable.
Well, you are right, and this is exactly what theory is the only thing that can decide what we can observe, and some theories render invisible what we want to observe. Okay? Which theories will we choose? Which facts will we unearth? Possible answers. I am not saying that these are the answers. These are possible answers. The national system of innovation approach, the learning and competence building approach, the arrangio produttivo locais, progressistas approach. But what about power? And here we come of a weakness of the national system of innovation approach that has been recognized by Lungbel, and it is that they didn't put conflict, and they didn't put power relationship into the national system of innovation approach. And Lungbel has clearly said this is a weakness of the approach. So I am not trying to put power into the approach, this would be too much, but I just want to share how can we grasp this complicated issue. We need to incorporate power in the analysis, particularly if we want to understand knowledge-based inequality. And here enters Michael Mann theory. Michael Mann is a great sociologist that wrote 3 big books named The Sources of Social Power. And he talked about the 4 sources of social power: ideological, economic, military, and political. And it's very easy to understand that knowledge is deeply related to all of them. I am not going to give examples. I leave this as homework for you. Besides, we have distributive power, mastery exercises over other people, and collective power, cooperation to enhance joint power over third parties in state of nature. Okay? And it is much more developed in the paper, and it's complicated. So I didn't want to go into it. With all this theoretical approach, we go and we look to facts, depending on what, of course, we are looking. Okay? The prospective approach. Which are the most influential trends? This is the question that the prospective approach asks. And the evolution of inequality is one. And one of the men that have made a very harsh prospective approach related to inequality is a great development economist, Albert Hirschman. Tolerance to inequality is like a credit that falls due a certain date. It is extended in the expectation that the disparities will eventually narrow again. If this does not occur, there is bound to be trouble and perhaps disaster. If we do not take care of inequality today, bound to be trouble and perhaps disaster in the near future. So, this approach says, take care from a knowledge and innovation point of view of inequality. This is not only a moral issue, it's also a very practical issue. And then we come to the propositive approach. What we can propose, it depends on what you are looking at. To work towards the democratization of knowledge, but it's clear that we want to go forward. Who said knowledge is power? Francis Bacon. Very long. And he was right, and he continued to be right. But knowledge is distributed power as well as collective power. And we are living in or suffering from a capitalist knowledge society. In such society, the distributive power of knowledge is much more influential than its collective power. So democratizing knowledge implies enhancing the collective power of knowledge, that is, cooperation to enhance one's power over third parties of knowledge. And how can we do that? There is no one answer. It depends on in which way you want to work toward the democratization of knowledge. So, how do you imagine the design of a democratic knowledge policy aimed at enhancing the collective power of knowledge? You'll be main concerned with innovation in informal settings, academic research agendas, local innovations, enhancement of small and medium enterprises, workers' capability building, knowledge, innovation, and gender, the planet Earth. I don't know. I think that perhaps this gives account of many of the subjects of your work, if not all, surely not. We are working in my country, in my university, in the design of a democratic knowledge policy aimed at enhancing the collective power of knowledge in the academic research agendas. You know how, well, I am going quick, so I'm going to take 10 minutes to just to tell you what we are doing. We have a program, a competitive fund program, called